Not wide, not for long, but real. It was small and fleeting, but it was enough to tell Cole that the wall between them was no longer just cracked. It was breaking apart from that day forward. The soldiers in the mess hall never called her pet. Again, they still watched her with curiosity, but there was a new tone in their glances. Not mockery, but respect. And Cole knew it wasn't because of him. It was because Areshka had earned it herself. The orders came early in the morning. The cold light of dawn had barely touched the outpost when Cole was called into the command room. The message was short. Areshka was to be transferred to another unit, far from Kilo 7. The official reason was security, but Cole knew. What it really meant, someone higher up didn't want a Vreth warrior. Even a small one, living among humans without chains. When Cole told her, she didn't speak at first. She sat on the edge of the bed, the scarf still wrapped around her. Neck, her golden eyes fixed on the floor. When? She asked quietly. Tomorrow, Cole said. The silence that followed felt heavy. She didn't argue, didn't ask why. But he could see it in the way her hands gripped the blanket. She didn't want to go. That evening, they ate together. In the mess hall, the room was quieter than usual. A few soldiers glanced at them. Knowing what was coming, Areshka didn't touch her food much. She sat and thought, her gaze moving between the cup in front of her and Cole's face. Afterward, Cole walked her back to her room. At the door, she stopped and turned to him. "You found me in the dust," she said slowly, "I thought. You wanted something, that is how it always was. But you gave. And took nothing." She paused, her voice catching for the first time since he had known her. "You changed." What I thought humans were. He didn't know what to say, but... She stepped closer. Her hand was small and cold as she took his in both of hers. She looked up at him, her eyes unsteady but determined. "I am a warrior," she said, "but when you touched me with kindness, I learned something greater." For a moment, the room felt too small, too quiet. Cole realized his heart was pounding harder than it had in any battle. He gave her hand a light squeeze. "You don't have to go," he said, surprising himself. She blinked. "You can stop it." He thought of the chain of command, of the signatures and protocols, of how many people above him would say no. But then he thought of the first day of finding her trembling in the dust, of her pushing food away, of her standing in the mess. Hall to defend him, and he knew his answer. "I'll find a way," he said, the next morning. When the transport crew came to collect her, Cole met them at the landing pad. His voice was calm, but his stance left no room for argument. "She stays," he told them. The officer in charge frowned. "Orders say Cole cut him off. Then the orders are wrong." It took nearly an hour of heated calls and quiet threats, but when the dust settled, the transport left without her. She stood a few steps away during it all, silent, watching when it was over. Cole walked back toward her. "You're not going anywhere," he said. She didn't speak, just stepped forward and placed her hand lightly against his chest. Right over his heartbeat, she stayed like that for a few seconds before lowering her hand. "Then I fight here," she said simply. From that day forward, Areshka moved through the outpost like she belonged there. She trained with the soldiers, joined them at meals, even offered advice during drills. She still kept the scarf, still kept the small wooden soldier on her table. But the guarded look in her eyes was gone. Weeks later, during a quiet evening, Cole found her in the training yard. She was sitting on one of the benches, polishing her blade. When she saw him, she stood, walked over, and without a word, took his hand again. It wasn't trembling this time. Her grip was steady. "Sure, you gave me more than food," she said softly. "You gave me a place." Cole felt the corners of his mouth turn upward. "And you gave me a reminder," he said, "that kindness can be stronger than fear." They stood there for a moment. No words, just the quiet hum of the night around them. And Cole knew this was no longer about a rescue, no longer about human and alien. It was about two warriors, one who had been broken, one who refused to leave her behind, and how a single touch in the dust had changed both of their lives forever. Leora had always been told that humans were monsters. Her elders said they hunted other races, that they ate alien flesh and wore alien skin. Every child in her village grew up with those stories. So when the raiders came and the village burned, and she found herself alone in the forest, the last thing she ever wanted was to meet a human. The night was cold, and her small body shivered with every gust of wind. Her thin clothes were torn, her knees scraped from running through sharp rocks and fallen branches. She kept glancing over her shoulder, afraid the raiders were still following. Her breath came in short, sharp bursts. Her stomach hurt from hunger, and her throat was dry from crying. Still, she forced herself to keep walking. If she stopped, she would die, but her legs gave way before dawn. She collapsed near the base of an old tree. Her eyes heavy, her mind dizzy. She thought she heard footsteps, but told herself it was just the wind. The stories said humans walked quietly, hunting their prey. Her heart pounded. She tried to crawl, but her arms felt weak. The shadows moved, and a tall figure stepped into the pale morning light. It was a human. His clothes were strange, layered with dark fabric and pieces of metal. He carried a pack on his back and a long object slung over his shoulder. Her mind screamed at her to run, but her body stayed frozen. Every breath felt like it could be her last. The man crouched down, his face calm, his eyes studying her. She waited for teeth to show, for the attack to come, but instead, he reached into his pack. Her pulse raced as he pulled something out. It was wrapped in cloth. She thought it might be a weapon or some strange human tool, but when he unwrapped it, steam rose into the cold air. The smell hit her first warm bread, cooked grain, and something sweet. Her hunger twisted into a sharp ache. She wanted it so badly, her mouth filled with saliva, but her fear held her still. The man spoke. His voice was deep but gentle. She didn't understand every word, but she heard one clearly: safe. She didn't believe him. Safe was a word predators used to lure their prey. Still, her eyes were locked on the food. The man didn't move closer, just held it out at arm's length. She could run, she thought, grab it and escape, but something in his eyes made her hesitate. They weren't the eyes of a hunter. They weren't cold or hungry. They were worried, like he was afraid for her, not of her. Slowly, she pushed herself up on shaking arms. Her feet stayed ready to spring away. The man noticed her hesitation and placed the food on the ground between them. Then, he sat back, hands open, showing no threat. Leora's breathing was uneven. Every instinct told her to flee, but her body moved forward instead. She took the food with quick hands and pulled it close to her chest. Her eyes never left him as she took a small bite. The taste was soft, rich, and nothing like the bitter roots she had eaten to survive. Her lips trembled, not just from the cold, but from confusion. Why would a human feed her? The man reached into his pack again. This time, he pulled out a folded piece of cloth and held it out. She flinched, thinking it might be a net or rope. But when she touched it, she realized it was warm. A coat, thick and lined, far better than anything she had. He motioned for her to put it on. Her fingers hesitated on the buttons. No one had ever given her something without asking for something in return. For a long moment, they just looked at each other. The forest was quiet, the morning mist curling around the trees. A bird called in the distance. Leora's fear didn't vanish, but it cracked enough for something else to slip through curiosity. She wondered if maybe, just maybe, the stories were wrong. But then her mind reminded her humans were clever. Maybe he was only waiting until she trusted him, and then... Still, when he stood and motioned for her to follow, her legs moved. She told herself it was only to see where he was going. Maybe he would lead her to other captives. Maybe she could escape into a safer place. but as she walked behind him, wrapped in his coat, clutching the bread he had given, she couldn't stop glancing at the back of his head. Her fear was still there, deep in her chest, but something new had joined it. A tiny flicker of doubt about everything she thought she knew, and as the mist slowly cleared, she realized that she was not only walking with a human, she was following him willingly. And that thought scared her more than the stories ever had. The forest path was narrow, with roots twisting under the moss. Leora kept her eyes low, watching where she stepped. The coat he had given her was warm, but she still felt a chill, not from the cold, but from the weight of not knowing what he truly wanted. The human walked ahead with steady steps. His back was broad, the strange metal object still slung over his shoulder. He didn't look back often, but when he did, his eyes scanned her quickly, checking if she was keeping up. She wasn't used to that. No one checked on her like that before, not even in the village. It made her uneasy, because care was something she didn't understand from a human. They reached a small clearing. The sunlight broke through the canopy, painting golden lines on the ground. The human stopped, dropped his pack, and motioned for her to sit. She hesitated, her mind whispering that maybe now the trap would be sprung. But instead, he knelt and took out a small bottle of clear liquid. He opened it and offered it to her. She sniffed, recognizing the scent of clean water. Hunger was dangerous, but thirst could kill faster. So she took it. Her hands trembled as she drank, the cold water sliding down her dry throat. It felt like life returning to her when she handed it back. He nodded. He didn't drink from it himself, just put it away. That made her pause. Why would he give her water first if he was the one carrying it through the forest? She thought humans were selfish, always taking before giving. Her stories never spoke of them sharing anything. He pulled something else from his pack, small pieces of cloth. They looked like scraps, but when he opened them, they revealed bits of dried fruit. The smell was sweet and strange. He handed her one piece and took another for himself. She didn't eat right away. She stared at it, wondering if maybe it had some hidden poison, but he bit into his piece without hesitation. She watched him chew and swallow before she dared to taste hers. The flavor was bright, sweet, and almost too good. It was the first time in days she'd eaten something that wasn't bitter or hard. After a while, he stood and began walking again. This time, his pace was slower. She realized he was adjusting his speed to match hers. That was strange. Predators didn't slow down for prey. They forced it to keep up or left it behind. He wasn't doing either. He seemed patient the deeper they went into the forest. The more she began to notice the small things. Whenever a branch was low, he pushed it aside so it wouldn't snap back at her. Whenever the ground dipped or rose sharply, he glanced back to make sure she didn't stumble. When her foot caught on a root and she almost fell, his hand shot out, catching her arm before she could hit the ground. His touch was firm, but not rough. He let go immediately after, stepping back like he didn't want to scare her. Eventually, they reached a cluster of rocks shaped like a half circle at the center. A small fire pit lay cold and unused. The human dropped his pack and began pulling things from its sticks, dried grass, and a small metal box. With quick movements, he built a small fire. The warmth spread fast, chasing away the damp forest. Leora sat near the edge, unsure if she should move closer. But the smell of the smoke and the faint crackle of the fire made her shoulders relax. The fire didn't just warm her hands, it made her feel safer. It was strange, 'cause she'd never thought of safety as something that could come from being near a human. As the flames grew, he pulled out a small pot and set it above the fire. He poured water into it, then added dry grains from a pouch. Leora's stomach growled softly, and she hoped he didn't hear. But his lips curved slightly, as if he had. Soon the scent of cooking filled the space between them. Her body leaned forward without her realizing it, drawn by the warmth and the smell while the food cooked. He tried speaking to her. His words were slow, careful. She caught pieces asking her name, where she came from, if she was hurt. She didn't answer. Not yet, she wasn't ready to trust. But he didn't seem upset by her silence. He just nodded and stirred the pot. It was almost like he understood that trust couldn't be forced. When the food was ready, he poured some into a small wooden bowl and handed it to her. She stared at it. It was just simple porridge. Nothing fancy, but it was warm, and it was hers. She took a bite, and the heat spread through her. It didn't taste like danger. It tasted like something her mother once made when she was very young. That memory hurt, but it also softened something inside her. The human ate his portion quietly, without watching her too closely. She realized he was giving her space even though they were in the same small clearing. That was unexpected, and every unexpected kindness chipped away at the fear she carried. She still didn't know his name, and he didn't know hers, but she found herself glancing at him in the firelight. And for the first time since the raid, her heart wasn't beating in panic. She didn't understand him. She didn't know why he helped her, but one thing was clear. This human didn't fit the stories at all. Night fell over the forest like a slow-moving blanket. The warmth of the fire had faded, leaving only faint embers that glowed weakly in the pit. Leora sat with her back against the curved rock wall of the shelter, the thick coat still wrapped. Around her, the human sat a short distance away, quietly cleaning the strange weapon he carried. The crackling of the fire was the only sound for a long time, but in the silence, her ears picked up something else: small movements in the distance. Twigs snapping, leaves rustling, far beyond the light of their little camp. Her body tensed. She had lived in forests before, but this place was different. The air was heavy, the shadows too deep. Her eyes darted toward the human, wondering if he heard it too. He was still working on the weapon, but his head tilted slightly. She realized then, yes, he had heard it, and he was pretending not to alarm her. He set the weapon aside and stood. He didn't speak, only checked the perimeter of the camp with slow, careful steps. When he returned, he picked up the weapon and sat near the edge of the firelight. His gaze fixed on the dark trees beyond. The stillness made her uneasy. She tried to close her eyes and sleep, but every time her mind drifted, a faint noise snapped her back awake. It wasn't just animals. There was a rhythm to the sounds, like something pacing them, watching, waiting. At one point, she saw his hands tighten around the weapon. The faint muscles in his jaw moved. Her fear rose again, not of him, but of whatever was out there. She pulled the coat tighter around herself. The fire seemed so small now, its light too weak to keep the dark at bay. Minutes dragged into hours. Her eyes grew heavy, but she fought the pull of sleep. Every shadow seemed to twist into shapes she couldn't name. She thought of the raiders could they have followed? If so, why wait in the darkness instead of attacking now? The humans seemed to think the same, because he didn't rest at all. He stayed there, a silent figure at the camp's edge, his eyes scanning the black spaces between the trees. Then, faint but clear, came a low growl. It wasn't close enough to see, but close enough to make the hair on her arms rise. The human shifted his stance, raising the weapon slightly. The sound came again, longer this time, and from a different angle. Leora's heart pounded. She had heard many creatures before, but this was different. This was a predator, and it was not afraid of them. The human glanced over his shoulder at her. His eyes were calm but sharp, silently telling her to stay where she was. She nodded without speaking. Something in his gaze made her believe, for the first time, that he wasn't going to let anything happen to her. The growls moved away after a while, replaced by the sound of heavy steps fading into the night. But the human didn't relax. He stayed at his post, listening, watching, waiting. Leora pulled her knees to her chest. She wondered why he did it, why guard her so fiercely when they didn't even know each other. He could have left her in the forest when he found her. He could have taken his food and his coat back and walked away instead. He sat here, awake, while the dark pressed in around them. The idea of humans being monsters felt more and more like a lie. Or maybe, she thought, he was just one strange exception. Hours later, the fire had almost died completely. A faint silver light began to creep into the forest, the first sign of morning. The human finally lowered his weapon, letting out a slow breath. He turned to her, and for the first time that night, he spoke softly. "It's gone," he said, his voice low. She didn't know if he meant the creature or the danger. But she believed him, her body tense for so long. Finally let go, and her eyes closed. The last thing she saw before sleep took her was the human leaning back against the rocks, still keeping watch, even though the danger had passed. And in that moment, somewhere deep inside, a tiny seed of trust began to grow. The morning sun pushed through the trees, turning the mist into pale silver threads. Leora woke to the soft sound of the human moving about the camp. Her first instinct was to check if he was still there, and he was, kneeling near the remains of the fire, carefully adding sticks to bring the flames back to life. It struck her as strange he had stayed up most of the night guarding her, and yet he didn't look tired. Or maybe he was, but he didn't want her to see it. She rubbed her eyes, still feeling the heaviness from the night before. The memory of those growls in the dark clung to her. She glanced at the human again, wondering if he would explain what had been out there. But he didn't speak. Instead, he reached into his pack and pulled out a small pot. He poured water from a metal bottle into it and set it over the fire. Soon, the smell of warming broth drifted between them. It was then she asked the question that had been haunting her since the moment they met. Her voice was soft, hesitant, almost as if saying the words out loud could bring danger closer. "Do humans eat us?" she asked. The human froze for a second, then turned his head slowly toward her. His eyebrows lifted slightly, not in anger, but in surprise. Then, to her shock, he laughed. Not a loud, mocking laugh, but a short, warm one. "Eat you?" "No," he said, shaking his head. "Who told you that?" She looked away, embarrassed. It had always been part of her world. "As true as the sun rising in the morning, our elders," she said quietly. "They say humans hunt other races, cook them, keep their bones." The human leaned back, his expression softer now. "Then your elders are wrong," he said, simply. "Humans. We fight sometimes, yes, but not like that." He picked up a stick and stirred the fire while he spoke. "On my world, there are rules," he continued. "There are things we don't do, no matter the war, no matter the hunger." She studied his face, looking for any sign of a lie, but his eyes stayed steady, the lines of his mouth calm. "You help strangers?" she asked, unsure if she could believe that. "Sometimes," he admitted. "Not everyone. Not always. But when we can, yes, we help." He began to tell her small pieces of stories about human medics on far-off battlefields carrying alien soldiers to safety, about traders who traveled weeks across dangerous routes just to bring medicine to a sick village, about explorers who built shelters for people they had never met before. Leora listened in silence. These were not the humans she had been taught to fear. These were different. The pot began to bubble, and he poured some of the broth into a small bowl. He handed it to her, waiting until she took the first sip before he served himself. It was warm, soft on the tongue, and filled with the taste of cooked grain and herbs. She searched for meat in it, but found none. Her lips pressed together in thought of, he truly meant to eat her. Why give her food like this first? Why not simply take what he wanted? The logic of her people's fear began to crack. Piece by piece, she caught herself staring at him too long. When he noticed, she quickly looked away. But something in her chest felt lighter. She wasn't ready. To say she trusted him, but she could no longer deny that he didn't act like the predator she had imagined. As they ate, the firelight danced across his face. It softened the angles of his jaw, made the lines around his eyes seem less sharp. For the first time, she allowed herself to imagine that perhaps walking with him would not end in her death. Perhaps it could even lead her to safety. The human set his bowl down and leaned back. "You should rest more," he said. "We'll move soon, but you need your strength." It startled her he was thinking of her needs again. She didn't answer. But she kept watching him from the corner of her eye. There was still danger in this forest, and maybe in him, too. But it was a danger she was starting to understand. And somehow, that was less frightening than the shadows they had faced in the night. The truth was still settling in her mind. The truth that maybe the stories had been wrong all along. They had barely finished the morning meal when the forest changed. It was subtle at first, a quiet that was too quiet. The distant birdsong faded. The rustle of small creatures vanished. Leora noticed it, but before she could speak, the human had already stiffened, his head turned slightly, listening. One hand moved toward his weapon without any rush, but with certainty, he motioned for her to stay low, his eyes holding hers for a brief moment. The warmth she had felt from him earlier was gone now, replaced by something sharper. He was a different person in that instant. Focused, ready, she crouched near the fire pit, clutching the coat around her as if it could shield her from what was coming. The first sound came from the east, fast footsteps crashing through the undergrowth. Then another from the west, heavier. The human's gaze darted between them, reading the pattern. He whispered one word she didn't understand. But his tone made the meaning clear. Trouble. The attackers appeared like shadows splitting from the trees. 3 figures, armored and armed, their faces hidden behind dull helmets. Leora's breath caught in her throat. These were not from her village. They carried the mark of the same raiders who had burned it. Her body froze, fear locking her to the ground. The human moved before she could think, in one smooth motion. He raised his weapon and fired. The sound cracked through the forest, sharp and powerful. One raider fell instantly. The others scattering for cover. Energy bolts tore through the air, hissing past her, striking sparks off the rocks behind. The human stepped in front of her without hesitation. He didn't hide behind the rocks. He became the shield. He moved with precision, firing, shifting, dropping low. Every shot he took was deliberate, forcing the raiders back, but they were skilled too. And soon the fight closed in. One raider rushed from the side, swinging a blade. Leora's eyes widened as the weapon came down toward the human, but he twisted aside, catching the attacker's arm and driving his elbow into the raider's ribs. The sound of the impact was dull but heavy. The raider collapsed, gasping. The human didn't even glance down. He turned immediately toward the next threat, another. Bolts struck the ground near her, scattering dirt across her face. The smell of burnt soil filled her nose. She coughed, trying to see through the haze. The human's voice cut through it, commanding but not cruel. "Stay down." He fought with a kind of controlled fury, not wild, not desperate, but with the clear intent to end the fight as quickly as possible. Each time a raider tried to flank him, he adjusted, blocking their path to her. She realized then he wasn't just fighting to survive. He was fighting to keep her alive. When the last raider tried to flee, the human didn't chase. He lowered his weapon slowly, keeping it ready until the forest was quiet again. Only then did he turn toward her. "Are you hurt?" he asked, his voice low, his eyes scanning her quickly. She shook her head, still unable to speak. Her hands trembled, not from the cold, but from the shock of what she had just seen. There was a dark stain on his sleeve. She pointed at it, her voice breaking. "You're bleeding," she said. He glanced at it briefly, as if it were nothing. "It's fine," he replied. then turned away to check the area again. But she saw the way his hand pressed against it, the way his jaw tightened. She stood slowly, taking a hesitant step toward him. You could have run, she said softly. He looked back at her. The faintest trace of a smile on his lips. Could have, he said, didn't want to. It was such a simple answer, but it hit her harder than any speech could have. This human had risked his life, taken wounds, and stood between her and death without a moment's pause. And for the first time, she felt not just doubt about the stories of her people. She felt anger at them. Anger for painting humans as nothing but monsters when one had just proven himself the opposite. He sat down near the fire, reloading his weapon with steady hands. Leora found herself kneeling beside him. Unsure why, she wanted to say something, to thank him, but the words tangled in her throat. So instead, she reached into his pack and took out the water. Offering it to him, his eyes met hers, and though he didn't speak, there was a flicker. There's something between gratitude and understanding. The forest was quiet again, but this time, the silence felt different. It wasn't empty, was full of the unspoken truth between them that whatever else might happen, this human would not let her fall. The fire crackled softly as the human adjusted the bandage around his arm. It was not a deep wound, but the blood had soaked through part of his sleeve. Leora sat across from him, her knees drawn close, watching as he worked in silence. Every now and then, his eyes flicked toward the trees, still alert, still listening for danger. Even after the attack, he hadn't let his guard down, and though the fight was over, the tension in the air lingered like the smell of burnt soil. When the last of the supplies were packed, he rose. Time to move, he said, his tone calm but firm. She hesitated, glancing at the direction they had come from. It would have been easier to hide in the shelter, to rest, but she understood. The raiders found them once, they could find them again, and this time they might bring more. He adjusted the straps of his pack, then reached down to offer her a hand. For a moment she froze, staring at it. His fingers were rough, marked by small scars. It was the hand of someone who had worked, fought, endured. Slowly, she placed her hand in his. It was warm, steady. And when he pulled her to her feet, it felt like a promise. They walked side by side through the forest. The morning sun filtered through the leaves, casting shifting patterns on the ground. Her steps were quieter now, her breathing calmer. She found herself matching his pace without thinking. Every time they reached a tricky patch of terrain, steep rocks, tangled roots, he slowed. Sometimes he walked ahead to test the ground. Other times he motioned for her to follow exactly in his steps. Hours passed, and with them came small moments, like when they stopped at a stream and he crouched to refill his water bottle. Instead of drinking first, he handed it to her. She sipped, the cool liquid washing away the dryness in her throat. When she handed it back, she realized she no longer feared he might poison it. That thought alone startled her. Trust was growing quietly. Without her permission, at midday, they rested under the shade of a broad tree. He pulled out a small packet of dried rations and broke it in half. Giving her the larger portion, she frowned, pushing it back toward him. "You need it more," she said. But he only shook his head. "Eat," he told her. "You're lighter. You'll weaken faster." The way he said it left no room for argument, so she ate, watching him from the corner of her eye as he chewed, slowly conserving every bite. The path ahead took them through rough terrain, steep inclines where loose stones slid under their feet. At one point, her foot slipped on a wet rock. Before she could fall, his arm shot out, pulling her back too. Balance. She felt the strength in his grip, not crushing but unshakable when he let go. Her heart was still racing, not from the near fall, but from the way he hadn't hesitated. As they climbed higher, the forest thinned, opening to a view of the valley below. She stopped for a moment, staring. From up here, the smoke from her Destroyed village was just a faint smudge on the horizon. The sight made her chest ache. The human noticed her stillness and turned to follow her gaze. His eyes darkened, but he didn't speak. Instead, he stepped closer, resting a hand lightly on her shoulder for a moment before moving on. It was brief, but it said more than any words could. He understood loss. That evening, they found another sheltered spot to camp. This time, she helped him gather wood. When he started the fire, she sat closer than before. Not because of the cold, but because she wanted to. They spoke more that night. Though her words were still careful, she told him small things. What her home looked like before the raid, the taste of the bread her mother used to bake in return. He shared fragments of his own world, oceans larger than continents, skies filled with machines that could cross the stars. Her mind tried to imagine it all, failing but wanting to understand as the fire burned low. She caught herself studying him, noticing the way his eyes softened when he listened. The way his hands moved with purpose when he worked, she realized. She was no longer just following him out of necessity. She was walking with him because she wanted to, somehow, in the space between danger and silence. He had stopped being only a protector. He had become something more, someone she could stand beside. When she lay down to sleep, wrapped in the coat he had given her, she didn't curl into a ball like before. Her breathing was steady, her muscles relaxed. And for the first time in many nights, she drifted into dreams without fear.